Good morning, everyone. Now, usually at these types of events, I actually end up being given either the first morning slot before the caffeine hits actually kicked in. I either get that pre-lunch slot when everyone's getting that teensy bit hangry, or I get the slot at the end of the day when everybody's just tired and they want to get home. So I'm really, really happy to be here at this time, which is a really great mindset to actually start a presentation. So that's brilliant. I'd also like to just start by thanking, obviously, the College of Radiographers, or the Society of Radiographers, and their sponsors, Philips, for inviting me to come and speak to you all today. And it's really lovely to see such a wide variety of real-life people instead of just little faces on a 17-inch laptop. So it's great. So, as you've heard, my name is Kerry Mills, and I'm currently the National Clinical Advisor for Imaging with Health Education England. Now, I say currently because I'm due to actually move roles in the very near future. It may even be Monday, actually. And I'm actually going to become the National Education and Training Programme Lead for Imaging. Essentially, it's the same remit with just a few add-ons and a fancy new title, but as we start our transition and we merge into NHS England. Now, I predominantly sit on the Cancer and Diagnostic Programme. However, I do regularly move across into the AHP programme, which is led by the brilliant Beverly Harden, of which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. So, as you can imagine, within radiography, there are many different work streams, and on this slide, you can see some examples of some of the areas that I oversee or that I input into. Now, we're really lucky to lead on such a diverse and exciting programme of work around the education and training. And this is hopefully going to continue as we move past that, I guess, immediate post-pandemic recovery phase into a much more long-term growth and sustainable development one. So if you haven't already guessed it, I am a diagnostic radiographer by background, and I feel very fortunate to have had, and I want to use a very current phrase that is currently being used. I've had a very squiggly career path. I, however, like to call it rather serendipitous, but whichever way you look at it, it's definitely not been straightforward. It's been very much self-driven. It's certainly been self-funded, all of the time with a little bit of luck or misfortune thrown in, depending on how you look at it. So when I look at the opportunities that are starting to appear for those people who are moving into our profession or they're considering moving into profession, then I feel my heart soars. And I feel really passionate that learners deserve the right to access that high-quality education, along with adequate and appropriate support to help them thrive in today's difficult and often challenging environment. So today I've been asked to come and speak to you about apprenticeships and specifically about how they support the development of radiography workforce in particular. My presentation will hopefully provide you with an overview of apprenticeships that we currently use within the profession, alongside an insight into some of the new and emerging levels of practice that will also hopefully follow this type of training route. I'll also outline the funding offers that Health Education England have, as well as provide you with that all-important signposting, but that you can find out more information after today. So before I begin, can I ask those of you who already employ apprentices and have them working in your department to raise your hands, please? Great, thank you very much. And can I ask those of you considering employing apprentices in the future within your departments to now raise your hands? Brilliant. It's always a good idea to know your audience, and I'm really pleased to see that we've already got so many people with previous experience. And in my books, though, that makes you the experts through your lived experiences and me merely a vessel through which to convey information into. So, let's start at the beginning. What is an apprenticeship? An apprenticeship is essentially a work-based education and training programme that enables somebody to work towards a nationally recognised qualification or a framework, all whilst getting paid a wage. Now, to add some context to that, I've got a few little snippets of facts for you around healthcare apprenticeships in general. There have been over 700 different employing organisations involved in the Trailblazer development programmes. HEE has directly supported over 90 of those trailblazers in health and science, and that includes ones in education, leadership and business. There are around 700 different apprenticeship standards now approved by the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, and this one, finally, around 90,000 NHS apprentices have started their journey since the introduction of the levy in 2017. Now, I'm sure you'll agree that that actually represents a real phenomenal amount of work that's already been undertaken and within the world of apprenticeships, and a huge number of learners who've started to benefit from these programmes. Apprenticeship qualifications have standards, they range from levels 2 to 7, so that's the equivalent of GCSEs right up to a master's level. So there's certainly something for everyone of every academic ability. Now, to access funding for apprenticeships, your organisation needs to have a salary bill of at least £3 million a year in order to be eligible to access the levy. So that is the funding that's set aside by the government to pay for those education costs. For most of you, that won't be a problem, but even if you did work for a smaller organisation that doesn't automatically qualify, there are various ways to transfer or to redirect the levy to ensure that you also get a slice of that pie. And it is important to note, however, that the levy funding can only be used to cover the apprenticeship training. It does not cover salary costs, so that means that you as the organisation do have to fund the apprentice's actual salary. Now, the fact that this is a very valued and seen as a sustainable method of funding, which operates through several different educational levels, means that it can be really used to support a whole system approach to workforce planning. And key drivers around this include the retention of existing staff and attraction of new talent. It helps to support innovative roles and skill sets that tend to emerge during any type of transformational activity. And plus, it really embeds education and training into the development and the maturity of a whole system. First thing on every manager's lips, and quite rightly so, should be the question, so what's in it for me? On this slide, you can see the list of the more obvious benefits, and that includes having control over the recruitment of potential future staff and working with those communities to attract and employ local people, many of whom perhaps will not have been able to attain a normal set of qualifications, or perhaps their personal situations may have meant that they couldn't actually access a more formal route of education in the past. So we are all aware, painfully aware, that workforce is one of our most precious investments. And so to have the opportunity to bring in local people who may possess unique and transferable skills and life experiences will really help create a much more diverse staff demographic within our departments. Now, ultimately, that increases that sense of belonging, that sense of community, and that loyalty that we all look for. Now, we're really lucky to have Laura Flatman coming here later, and she's going to be discussing her deep dive evaluation around radiography retention. And so what I've just spoken about, you'll see is really reflected in that piece of work. Now, obviously, another of the benefits is around assuring career development for the profession. And whilst, there will be those that don't place any importance in that, or they've got no desire whatsoever to travel upwards, what we want to be able to do is to ultimately create that continuous career ladder or escalator, whereby someone can enter healthcare as a school leaver, and then they progress through the different education levels until they reach the point that they choose to stay at. Of course, there are also much more subtle and largely anecdotal benefits, such as the fact that apprentices do spend the majority of their time in one single clinical environment, therefore making things like induction processes, knowledge and understanding of working practices, and generally establishing themselves within the team as a fully integrated staff member. And that's actually a lot easier, perhaps, that if they were only spending shorter durations of time in different departments in different academic years, something that we're a little bit more familiar with. As I said before, these are purely anecdotal reflections, and by no means are they quantifiable or are they evidenced yet. The table here also outlines responsibilities of the employer, which includes giving those apprentices a training contract and paying them a wage, supporting them to complete their studies, and also providing them with a mentor to help them do so. Now, obviously, I'm not able to give detail to the specific time requirements for each of the individual courses, as actually they're all really, really unique to the HEIs on all the further education colleges. So if this was something that you were considering, then I'd really urge you to engage with them personally to establish exactly when and how much you need to release those apprentices for to work on their academic studies. The other thing I just want to briefly touch on is that most apprentices tend to be employed on a full-time basis, and most apprenticeships recommend at least 30 hours of working time. Now, if it's any less than that, then there is a chance that the programme has to get extended because the requirements of the course have not been properly fulfilled. So it ends up that 18-month apprenticeship may actually turn into a 3-year extended one just because it's not been managed or executed adequately. So built within the apprenticeship is something called protected learning time, or much more commonly known as off-the-job training. And now this is a statutory requirement, and it must be taken during the apprentice's normal working hours. The idea of protected learning time is that it enables and it facilitates the development of those knowledge, skills and behaviours required of the apprenticeship itself. It constitutes about 20%, or just at least 20% of their working hours, and it must be directly relevant for the role for which they're training for. So this slide has got lots of examples of what this could look like, and it is really designed to be flexible so that the learning needs for each of those individuals can be considered and catered for. Every 12 weeks, there will be what's known as a tripartite meeting, and that's where the apprentice, the employer and the HEI will actually discuss the ongoing development of the individual. They can highlight and escalate any concerns, and they can also identify additional learning needs, so that there's a really timely and effective plan going forwards to maximise the apprentice's learning time. Now, the development of apprenticeships specific to radiography has obviously come about through various policies and procedures and reports that we're all very now familiar with, and which are stated on this slide. But pre-pandemic, the long-term plan indicated that we needed to diagnose cancers early. And sadly, post-pandemic, this isn't going to change. It feels like the demand for our services are growing every day, and I'm sure that many of you feel quite overwhelmed and a little bit apprehensive about how things are going to pan out eventually. And I guess the one thing that we do have on our side is that that spotlight is on diagnostics. And whilst that does feel slightly uncomfortable at times, it is necessary to highlight that. And we've spoken about it before this morning, about that chronic underinvestment in our services and our workforce that we've suffered for many years. We are now a priority profession, and therefore we do need to exhaust and we do need to exploit every opportunity to grow, develop and sustain our workforce. So apprenticeships are merely one way to do this, and therefore they must be utilised alongside the many other training routes that we've got available to us. Apprenticeships will not be everybody's first choice. However, they do give the opportunity to those who otherwise may not have it. And so I hope that you'll agree that we all need to consider how and where we can utilise them most effectively. I mentioned previously about the need for the consistent career escalator, and this is combined with the fact that we also need multiple step-off points within it. Every person cannot aspire to be a consultant radiographer because there simply isn't room. But more importantly, not everyone will want to do so. So what we need to do is to ensure that within each level there is sufficient room for development and for growth, and that this in turn will actually help create a much more self-fulfilling bandwidth which we can all work within. Finally, I think it's really fair to mention that by bringing in the workforce at a generically focused lower level of apprenticeship, it actually offers the opportunity for them to explore many different healthcare avenues available to them. So whilst everyone here in this room ideally wants people to come in and stay within radiography, what that level 2 or level 3 apprenticeship offers is that opportunity to try before you buy. And then that way they get to keep their avenues open until such time that they actually feel really confident and ready to commit to one singular profession. Now, I think in the long term, that's really going to help aid the overall retention and attrition rates as well. So hopefully, that's just given you just a tiny flavour of what the apprenticeships look like in general. And so now I'll turn my attention to what we actually have on offer in terms of radiography. That's great. So on this slide, I've listed all of the apprenticeships available that are relevant to radiography. And for ease of reference, I've put all the links to each one of these on a slide at the end of my presentation, so that if anyone is interested to look at the occupational standards, they don't actually have to go hunting them down on the Institute of Apprenticeships website. So to start with, we've got both the Level 2 Healthcare Support Worker and the Level 3 Healthcare Support Worker. The Level 2 is the entry grade, clearly, and it's very much aligned with the care certificate, of which I'm sure lots of you are very familiar with. The Level 3 also has that care certificate attached to it, but it's able to be contextualised to radiography and has that particular pathway embedded in it. It is, however, widely felt that that's not really specific enough to the profession, and it does lack clarity over the intended future role responsibilities, which is something that I'm going to discuss later as part of some upcoming development work that's happening in the very, very near future. Next, we've got the Level 4 Associate Practitioner in Mammography, and that's been a really popular choice for people who are looking to work specifically within that area only. The Level 5 Assistant Practitioner Apprenticeship is also popular, and whilst generic, there are quite a few education providers now that offer this course contextualised to radiography, which has largely been successful. We've got both diagnostic and therapeutic radiography in here as degree-level apprenticeships, and this is exactly the same qualification as the traditional undergraduate degree that we're familiar with. Interestingly, this is offered at both a Level 6 and a Level 7, with the latter being if someone was coming in with a first science-based degree. Next, we've got that Enhanced Clinical Practitioner apprenticeship, which is very new offering, and something that I'm going to just expand a little on later in my presentation. Interestingly, this is offered at Level 6, and whilst it does not have a formal qualification officially attached to it, it does align itself to the level of being a postgraduate certificate or a diploma. Finally, we've got the Advanced Clinical Practitioner apprenticeship at Level 7, which is the master's degree. Now, this hasn't been such a popular choice within radiography, sadly, and as a former programme lead of this apprenticeship programme, I know it's really difficult to map specific advanced practice roles within radiography to the more generic multidisciplinary framework and the occupational standards. I did have quite a few therapeutic radiographers on the programme, and their future job roles and responsibilities really did fit that criteria a lot more easily. So that's where we are with the ones that are currently available, and I want to stress here, so it's really important that we're discussing educational levels, not pay banding levels. Pay banding is something that is not depicted or specified by any apprenticeship programme, and that is entirely down to that local trust decision via the usual agenda for change processes. Moving on. So this is where I get to indulge a little bit, and I tell you what we're doing at HEE to be able to support you and your future apprentices. So this offer only started last year, and it already has been flying off the shelf. It's a nationally run programme, and it's filtered through into the regions via the HEE, the Health Education England, Cancer and Diagnostic Leads. As before, it came about in essence to encourage employers to utilise government levy in order to mobilise that workforce, developing specific competencies and capabilities that are unique to radiography in order to build that all-important capacity that we want and we need. Now, in 21-22, the year just gone by, we offered a £10,000 training package for every single apprentice that could be used by the employer to support and facilitate the completion of the programme. Now, whilst we cannot officially use this as backfill monies, we left the stipulation around its use extremely flexible, and then we left it to the employer's discretion as to what they did with it. As this was the first year of the offer, we initially scoped that interest, and then as a result of the feedback, we limited the levels of apprenticeships to the ones that you can see in the blue box, so essentially 4, 5 and 6. We also built into the offer the opportunity to use any of that underspend, that regional underspend, towards supporting additional training and educational capacity so that each region didn't actually lose out on the funding altogether if they weren't able to reach the targets or the numbers that they'd initially requested. So, where did we get to? And how did it go? So the slide here gives those all-important figures, and the blue box in the middle has a breakdown of every region, and you can see initially that we set a target of a total of 300 training grants throughout all 7 regions. Now, after expressions of interest, this was increased, and we actually funded a total of 372. The table on the right indicates the types of apprenticeships that the funding grant was put towards, with quite a healthy spread throughout. Now, therapeutic radiography does look a little low, however, this also does sit in alignment with the smaller number of students that we actually train every year, and also the fact that there was a lot less educational providers who were offering this as a degree apprenticeship. Now, we do have some more coming along online this year, which is really, really good news as well. So that's where we were the last financial year, and as we head in to the next financial year, we're already there, we obviously want to start to evaluate how the programme went, what worked and what didn't. We're looking at undertaking a much more thorough evaluation that really focuses quite a lot around the lived experiences of both the apprentices and the radiology managers, and hopefully this will give us some insight into those challenges, the barriers, and hopefully the positives as well, so that we can carry forward with our future plans. So talking about the future, what are we going to be doing right now? Okay, so we are offering the same £10,000 grant, as feedback indicated that this was really, really well received and very much appreciated. Secondly, you may have noticed on the previous slide that we actually had a total of 576 inquiries last year. And for this reason, we've actually increased our offer to fund 500 training grants, again, throughout all 7 regions. We're actually putting out those expressions of interest for these grants at the end of the month, literally in a couple of weeks, via our regional cancer and diagnostic lead, so please do look out for them. I've given all the details about this and who you need to contact in each region, again, at the end, so hopefully that will help somebody out. So we're also looking to include the Level 2 Healthcare Support Worker Apprenticeship in this year's offer. And we're just scoping out the interest around that, but that actually came back through listening and connecting with several radiology managers. And if anyone came to the recent NHSEI Workforce Study Day a couple of weeks ago, then you'll have heard Emma Spouse from the Royal Cornwall Trust describing how having access to a Level 2 apprenticeship would really help support the introduction of imaging pathway navigator roles by creating a really solid career escalator that would essentially form a type of upwards moving feeder chain. Finally, the good news is that this year the funding has been confirmed a lot earlier than last, so we're really hoping to get this money out as soon as possible, which will give the opportunity to access both a September and a January cohort start date. And I know that was a huge blocker last year in actually being able to spend that money. So now we're going to come on to some of the more recent apprenticeships that have just come into play, and that is the Enhanced Clinical Practitioner, though. This started out as a part of the work that Professor Alison Leary undertook in 2019, where she led a project that sought to define enhanced practice and where it can sit and how to put it into a workforce model. And on the top right hand of the screen, you'll see that outcome, and you can see that enhanced practice is actually nestled between intermediate and advanced. So the blue boxes outline the expectations of the practitioner who are going to be working at this level, and the pink box defines clearly how different it is to advanced practice. Now, this has always been a really topical discussion point within many nursing and AHP professions, and it's something that I expect will come up a little bit later on in those discussion sessions, so I'm not going to dwell on that particular conversation at this moment in time. One thing I do want to reiterate about this apprenticeship, and I've said that before, that this is pitched at level 6, however it could be delivered at level 7, and it doesn't have a specified educational outcome. That's like the degree apprenticeship or the level 7 master's one do. And that's quite difficult to get your head around, to be honest, and I think that over the next couple of months, what we'll find is that there'll be quite a few education providers really reviewing their current postgraduate and their CPD offerings to see how they can interweave them into the occupational standards for this particular apprenticeship. So in this instance, it really is a case of watch this space. The next slide indicates a brand new trailblazer around the Level 3 Senior Healthcare Worker Apprenticeship. And as you may recall that I spoke about earlier from one of my earlier slides, I mentioned that although this was utilised at present, the general consensus that it wasn't specific enough to radiography, especially if the apprentices that were completing it were actually looking to move into a pre-registration degree level programme in the future. So this really is a great case of you said and we did, in that a group of employers spoke up and they expressed their thoughts, and so it's been agreed that there will be a trailblazer group who's going to look at developing a bespoke level 3 programme specifically for a role within diagnostic radiography only. Now, important things to remember here is that the apprenticeship design is entirely employer-led, and that means we need you to engage and tell us what you want to see in it. I've put the details on the slide on how to register your interest, and I urge as many people to get involved as possible. Now, the deadline to join the group is actually tomorrow, so I see that as a positive sign that I get to remind you all here today to sign up without delay. Please do. So for those of you also with an interest in the therapeutic radiography healthcare support worker, if there is sufficient interest, then this can also be developed. However, without any engagement from you as employers, then this won't happen. So please, again, contact the group, make your voices heard and make them count. And just to reiterate, a trailblazer is about developing the actual standards, the occupational standards, what defines that role, and the EPA, the endpoint assessment. So it isn't specifically about the implementation because that comes later. So whilst it may only be a small step, it's most definitely a start and it's a move in the right direction. So I just wanted to start to round up my presentation, and I wanted to bring your attention to a tweet that I saw a few months ago on Twitter. It was posted by a degree apprentice radiographer, and she indicated that, yet again, she's experienced someone on a placement who was under the impression that the apprenticeship was not academic. This was quickly responded to by numerous parties. We got a HEI who runs a degree apprenticeship programme. I've just picked out a few here. There was an advanced practitioner, and there was also another student as well. And I think the main myth-busting that needs to be heard, and one that I hope that you will now go out and spread amongst your professional communities, is that apprenticeships are academic. And in the case of the degree apprenticeship, so like the one that's been tweeted about here, it contains exactly the same underpinning academic knowledge requirement as the traditional undergraduate degree that, again, we're very, very familiar with. And as Carl summed it up so eloquently in his tweet, it's a different road, a similar journey, and the same destination. So, to summarise, we've got an opportunity through the appropriate use of apprenticeships to really invest in our own locally grown workforce, and it offers that chance to develop relationships between local schools, colleges and communities. And by engaging with your local education providers, you as employers get to ensure that the courses that they offer support your workforce and that they are fit for purpose in your service delivery. So we have all been through some really, really tough times in terms of securing any type of CPD or educational funding. I know we've all been there. And at the moment, we have lots of funding available. However, we don't know how long this will last. But one thing we can be certain is it won't be there forever. So I therefore urge people to really take advantage of what's on offer there, or what's on offer now, if at all possible and appropriate. So just moving on, I've got a slide with some useful links as well to things that I've referenced throughout my presentation, including the names and the contact details of the HEA cancer and diagnostic leads who you need to contact if you do want a little bit of the slice of the money for apprenticeships. I've got, the next one's got details of the HEE Talent for Care team, who are absolutely fantastic at answering any specific or detailed questions about apprenticeships. And then finally, as promised, I've put the links to every single one of those apprenticeships that I've talked about, so you don't have to go and dig around on the Institute of Apprenticeships website. So I would just like to say really thank you very much for your attention. If anyone would like to talk about anything to do with apprenticeships, and I am here all day, so please come up and find me, and I'll do my best to answer your questions.